we get into this now. The Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana set to deliver his maiden budget speech on the 23rd of February. That's next week. Most observers believing his focus will be on stimulating economic growth and foreign direct investment into this depressed economic environment. Joining us now to discuss this, we're joined by the Wits University School of Economics Finance lecturer, that's Dr Lumkile Mondi, a Black Business Council CEO, Kganki Matabane, and Institute for Economic Justice and Budget and Tax Justice researcher, Zimbali Mncube. To all of you, gentlemen, thank you very much for making the time. We are discussing what we ought to look forward to in the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's speech next week, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but the education sector always gets the lion's share of the budget. It's something that I've almost even memorized, and we've just come out of an address by the Gauteng Education MEC in a school that's struggling with racial tension, to put it simply. So let me start with you, Dr. Mondi, and ask you whether we are getting our money's worth when we say education always, most certainly gets the lion's share of the budget.
So there's a multiplicity of challenges that undermine the efficient return that we should be getting from our investment in education. In fact, what we've just watched is really a disappointment, where the ANC government has been dismal in financing school infrastructure in the places where people live. So if you go to many schools in the townships, there's about 1 to 70 teacher to student ratio. Because firstly, there is no infrastructure that the ANC government has invested in. Secondly, teachers are stretched because they've got to teach those students. So you can imagine what value of learning does take place in an environment like that. But more importantly also is that even though the government has invested immensely in terms of training teachers through the Funza Lushaba scheme, what it's not doing is that those that are outside that schemes that we train at Wits, for example, to school of education, struggle to get employment. So there was a march last week, in fact, to Lusufi's office by these teachers who were trained or qualified, when in fact in many parts of our country we know that there is a shortage of teachers. They are underqualified teachers, but the unions, SADU, who is in alliance with the ANC, plays a bigger role in the allocation of teachers. But really, the fact that we've got teachers that are unemployed, that we are failing infrastructure, we've got very poor teacher-to-student ratios in Black Township. Therefore, it reinforces the perception among Black parents that education in the township is poorer. Therefore, if I can afford, is to export my child to a school like this one that we've just witnessed, and leads to the consequences of the racial tensions, because suddenly there is a brick in my wall, and I have to deal with that in my community. And I was never prepared for that, because the ANC has not dealt with the racial exclusions and the geography that we inherited in 1994. So what they've done, they invest even in RTP houses in the township. The properties that were owned by government, that's supposed to be built for low to middle income people, have been sold to developers who sold them to high income earning people, therefore continuing to exclude Black majority, who most of whom are low middle income. They are not highly skilled because of our racial past, and the ANC hasn't done much even in terms of that because of lack of investment in technical colleges and in school formation.
Yeah, Zimbali Mncube, it may not be time and again, but we do see these government ministers. In fact, I think I remember the Gauteng Education MEC, Panyaza Lesufi, opening one of the new schools in the province. I can almost hear his counter to Lumkile Mondi saying, no, but what are you talking about? We do build new schools. So what are you talking about when you say that the ANC government has not invested in schools that are located within townships, for example?
Yeah. I think Lumkile is raising really, really important points. But for me, I think we need to first acknowledge that the budget and budget processes play an important role in the protection and advancement of human rights, right? And this includes investing in quality public services, education, health, and social services. And so what we have seen in the numbers, I mean, the MEC can point to schools, but what we can see in the MTBPS and the medium-term expenditure framework is that there are budget cuts. And this underscores Lumkile's point. And it means that instead of investment into public education, we're going to see continued disinvestment. I mean, if you look at the MTBPS, it's proposing 3.3% of non-interest expenditure spending declines over the medium-term expenditure framework. And so that is really worrying for the education outcomes of particularly non-paying schools, which are mostly located in the townships.
Mr. Matabane, yours is purely vested in business as the Black Business Council, but I'd like to think that when you don't get the skills that the market requires, that again takes us back to the education space to say, are we producing the kinds of skills that the economy needs right now? Your thoughts on the education investment and whether or not we are getting our money's worth?
Thank you. I think the deeper question for me is that why in 28 years we have white people feeling so, some of the racist white people feeling so emboldened to say this school is our school. While the Freedom Charter said South Africa belongs to all who live in it. So there is something that has not happened in 28 years to find a situation where the racists are feeling much stronger. And it happens even in business. You've seen the judgment regarding the PPFA regulations during the week.
At the risk of digressing, because we're here to discuss the upcoming budget speech, at the risk of digressing, I'm intrigued by what you're saying, because even the MEC says, we will not breed new racists from this school. And that talks to what you are saying, that why is it that in 2022, racist attitudes are being emboldened in South Africa?
Yeah, I think that's where for me we should start from a racism point of view. To say if racists feel so comfortable to be racist in a country where majority are Africans, it means somewhere the system has not worked. Remember, taking you back to the presidency of Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki wouldn't have allowed things like this to happen. He would have dealt with racists. He has dealt with companies like Sasol. He has dealt with Anglo-American. Yeah. And once they see
so
it
what
coming
are you
from
saying
the
about
president,
Ramaphosa?
Once they see it coming from the top, racists will also then say, let's conform. We are here in South Africa. Those who don't want to be here, they could go somewhere else. But those who are here...
I ask you again, are you saying President Ramaphosa's administration is soft on racist attitudes?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying let's look at the deeper issues.
Yeah.
And I'm asking a question to say, why are people feeling so emboldened? People are telling us that 28 years into democracy, we still have 5% of the economy owned by blacks, 70% of the CEOs of the JSE companies are white, but they tell us we must end black economic empowerment. So the question is why are
so yours is clear, Mr.
Matabane?
Let's not even beat about the bush. Yours is clear. The ANC government has failed, because you have to look at who has been in power for the last 28 years. It is the ANC government. That's the sum total of what you say. Am I correct?
No, I'm not saying anyone has failed or anyone has succeeded. I'm asking questions. So we need to ask these questions. I'm sure government can also ask themselves the same questions to say something must have gone wrong somewhere. Okay. And then we need to correct it, because if we don't correct it, our kids will actually spit on our graves. because our kids will be forced to fight the very same battles. The poor kids at this school who were born way after 1994 are faced with this thing, and I'm sure this is not the only school. I'm sure other schools, the kids and the parents are very scared. And imagine in the what they call vergramde towns. If this thing is happening in Gauteng, imagine in towns where the majority of the people are Afrikaners, and you can just imagine how this thing is happening. People are probably scared to even come and say, we have this problem.
Yeah. Well, look, I could talk about that the whole day, because we in the business of news, and so we cover this almost on a daily. Let's come back to the matter at hand. Dr. Mondi, what do you foresee as being the priority areas when it comes to allocating what monies where?
Well, in fact, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Godongwana, is very, very lucky, because what we've seen, particularly in the first part of this past financial year, which is about to end, is a resurgence in our economy. There have been amazing receipts coming from the mining sector, because suddenly there was an increase in the demand for commodities, and that has boosted quite a number of companies' balance sheets. So many South African companies, particularly in the mining sector, are loaded cash-wise, and they've shared that with us, which is going to make our South African Revenue Services received much higher than what is budgeted for. So it's got a very strong kitty. And as my colleague has said next to me, that it's important to realize that the planning was looking at cutting real expenditures, as he eloquently explained. I'm hoping that some of those cuts that we saw in the medium-term budget statement will now, given that the kit is much stronger, will then lead to an improvement, particularly in the areas that you touch upon, that touched our people. So the education, hopefully we might have a 1% real increase, because we can now afford it. Health, which is critical, because we've seen how we're exposed during the COVID crisis. But also, I mean, here in Johannesburg, a critical hospital for us, because we teach most of our health students through that institutions. But, you know, the fire that broke out, there's been no repairs at all. It's all talk. So we want to see more there, not because I'm advanced and we want. I think it's a public good. It's a public good thing. And of course, housing. But we need housing in areas closer to places of work. So we need, I'm very happy with what the city is trying to do. So the city of Johannesburg is reclaiming quite a lot of dilapidated spaces, and I'm hoping that those will be converted into low income houses, so that we can bring people closer to infrastructure, closer to opportunities, rather than condemn them in the racial apartheid, special apartheid that we inherited.
All right, Dr. Mondi, you've touched on the social spending aspects of the budget. When we return, we're going to talk about the investment spend, where we need to get more money through putting monies in those particular areas. And so we're going to touch on that when we return. You're watching the debate uncensored, and we are trying to look ahead to what we can expect from the Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana's maiden speech on Wednesday when he takes to the podium. And so let's get back into it. Mr. Mncube, talk to us about investment spending. So Dr. Mondi spoke about investing in education or spending in education, whether it be housing and health and so on. So that's social spending. What about investment spending?
I think it will be important to understand how this revenue inflow, just to piggyback on the point Lumkile made, will be utilized not only for public services, but to also support the recovery of small businesses, which play a key role in our economy. And so the President, in his State of the Nation address, made a hint of the reintroduction of the loan guarantee scheme, which has now been rebranded as the bounce back scheme. We know that in its first iteration, it was largely a failure, with only about 18 billion of the 200 billion available being utilized by small businesses. So it saw a relatively poor uptake.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be key to understand what type of financing mechanisms are going to be the minister is going to expand on for this bounce back scheme, and to understand the type of criteria, which was a key impediment to businesses taking up some of the grants or the loans that were extended in the previous loan guarantee scheme.
Yeah.
And then another key issue for me in particular is the public employment stimulus. We know that the beneficiaries now are approaching about 1 million. If you count the first phase of the stimulus and the second phase.
Yeah.
And it has seen a great impact in terms of providing work opportunities. When you look at the teaching assistants, for instance, that have been deployed to various schools. And so it will be important to understand whether this will be extended, will we see another phase, and how much will be allocated. We have consistently advocated for the 100 billion that is allocated towards this stimulus to be inserted into the medium-term expenditure framework to support more job opportunities and develop career pathways for largely unemployed youth in the country.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Let's come to you, Mr. Matabane. And I've got a bit of a bone to pick with you, because as business people, you seem to be unusually quiet on the issue of infrastructure spend, which is also investment spend. So you spend on infrastructure, and as a result, there are returns, because once you have infrastructure, business is able to thrive. But you have people, the so-called mafia in the construction industry, who go around threatening projects, particularly those that are run by government but are obviously tendered to certain people, and they demand certain percentages to say, give us a share, because this is a project that we understand is financed by government, and therefore we have a right. Why have you been quiet as business people? The president has been speaking relentlessly on this. I know you're probably going to say, but what are they doing about it as government?
Yeah, thanks, Gonat. I'll come to that question, but I think maybe we need to start with the problem statement.
Yeah.
When you are the president or the minister of finance, you wake up to high unemployment rates where 10 million young people are sitting at home on a daily basis doing nothing. Wake up, sleep. So for us, that is the problem that we need to solve. Whatever we do as a country, we should be saying, are we solving this problem? Yeah. And we should not be saying we're creating job opportunities. You know, that is a PR language.
Creating jobs.
We should be creating sustainable jobs. So the president ultimately agreed that the government's role is to set the environment, and private sector should then create jobs.
Yeah.
And if you go to the NDP 2030, it says government should be able to create, not the government, the country should be able to create 11 million jobs, and 90% of those jobs are supposed to come from small business. And if we're then going back to the problem statement, we're saying that 10 million unemployed people, which is increasing every year when people are graduating, because in the 10 million, there are 3 million who've got higher education qualifications, degrees, yes, and diplomas. What then needs to be done to ensure that we support the sector that's supposed to create 90% of the jobs? For us, we should support it by basically two things. Zimbali has touched on one of that, is the funding. And we don't think the loan guarantee scheme will work, because remember, we're still in COVID. Companies have closed down. I'm sure by the time people close down, they are probably here in terms of debt. So small businesses and black businesses, women-owned businesses don't need debt. They need blended funding. Sure. They need to be given some space to recover. Right. That's one portion. The second portion, we're expecting the Minister of Finance to speed up the procurement bill, the public procurement bill, because that will allow small businesses, black businesses, women-owned businesses to have access to state procurement. Because the president always say, when he addresses women events every August, he has said this for the past 2 to 3 years, to say he's planning to put aside 40% of the procurement, state procurement for women-owned businesses. But we always tell him, no, this thing will never work until it's in law.
Yeah.
There's a public procurement bill which was released in 2020. We're now sitting in 2022. Nothing has actually happened. So
Sure.
We're expecting the Minister of Finance to say, this is how I'm going to support small businesses, because we all agree that the jobs will be created by small businesses.
Sure.
Coming back to your issue, I think that is lawlessness. The government should basically implement what they're talking about. When they say these people are causing chaos, they go to these construction sites and demand this 30%. Government law enforcement agencies should do their work.
Yeah,
if they were doing their work, that thing was never going to happen, because this is not a new thing. It started probably more than 5 years ago.
And I've got to tell you,
continuing.
I've got to tell you, I haven't heard anyone who has been arrested as a result of these kinds of actions. I mean, we know about groupings such as Maiden in KZN. I haven't heard anyone arrested. Dr. Mondi, perhaps final point from you. What is it that we probably are not anticipating that could be a surprise element by Godongwana?
A tax increase.
Tax increase?
Yeah. Personal income tax increase, which I'm not expecting. So it could be a shock if it does get true.
Can he do that?
He shouldn't do that, but it can be a surprise.
Sheesh. Okay. Let's leave it there. Thank you very much to all of you for making the time to speak to us about what we can look forward to the Finance Minister tabling his maiden budget speech. You may say, why maiden? Because he spoke last year. That's the midterm budget policy statement he makes in October. But the key, the nuts and bolts of the budget is when the Finance Minister speaks in February on the back of the President having tabled the SONA speech. All right.